Hello and welcome. I'm Rafael Bernal, the lead writer for The Hill Latino. I'm honored to be moderating this virtual event by Changing America, an editorial section of The Hill aimed at awakening the rising spirit of citizenship across the country. Since launching in the fall of 2019, Changing America has been devoted to telling powerful stories about climate change, diversity and inclusion, education, health, and more. Stories that inspire, spark thought, define need, and demand action. Thank you for joining us for Changing America's latest virtual event, Hispanic Heritage Month, Recent Accomplishments and Urgent Challenges. We are currently midway through Hispanic Heritage Month, which spans annually from the middle of September until October 15th. Originally 1 week long, the celebration was first recognized in 1968. Since then, the Hispanic population in the U.S. has grown sixfold, and in 2020, Hispanic Americans made up nearly 1 in 5 people in the country. Over the next half hour, I'll talk with our panelists about what it means to be Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, or Latin American. We'll also speak about key issues faced by Latinos, including immigration policy and why it matters to our community. Together, we'll explore the true spirit of Hispanic Heritage Month and deep dive into solutions for the whole community. I'd like to thank Changing America's presenting sponsor, Kia, for its support of today's event. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag Changing America. We are broadcasting live, and if you experience any trouble with the live stream, please refresh the page. That should be a quick fix. I'm excited to now introduce our panel. Joining us today is Monica Ramirez, an award-winning activist, attorney, and co-founder and president of Justice for Migrant Women. Mario H. Lopez is the president of the Hispanic Leadership Fund, a nonpartisan advocacy organization aimed at promoting public policy to advance liberty, opportunity, and prosperity for all. Finally, Victoria Ballesteros, the Director of Communications at the National Immigration Law Center, working to change the way American society views migrants. So thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to talk to all of you, as always. I'm going to start with you, Monica. You've done a lot of activism around the struggles of migrant women and girls. Please, explain to our audience what it is, what is special about the struggles that those specific groups face, and especially undocumented women and girls.
Yeah, thank you, Rafael. It's really great to be here with all of you. And, I think that first we have to name the fact that for many, many years here in the United States, migrant women and their work was not even tracked. Migrant women who are coming into the United States were considered family migrants. They weren't considered economic migrants. So when you have an entire group of individuals who are essentially being erased, that's your starting point, and you can imagine the kind of experiences they have from there. Most of my work is focused on migrant farm worker women and girls. And unfortunately, many farm worker women experience high rates of sexual harassment, pay disparity, and many other issues. And when they're undocumented, unfortunately, people think that they can do whatever they want to them and that there will be no consequences. So we've seen widespread harm against farm worker women and girls, and that's the work that I've dedicated my career to addressing and to advancing the rights of migrant women, not only in agriculture, but in other fields as well.
So there's a lot of fields where immigration really touches as a community. But Mario, I've heard you say, and you said recently again, all issues are Hispanic issues. And you're right, our community routinely lists education, healthcare, the economy as their top issues. Yet immigration, we talk about it a lot, and it affects our community a lot. Can you explain that dichotomy a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think that, when you're talking about these polls, right, and as you rightly say, education and other things come higher. I think that when the respondents who ask that, they're thinking about what is affecting their life, sort of day to day, right? And in terms of policy, right, which is normally how those questions are phrased, I think that, that's why you see some of those other issues kind of come up. But in terms of the way our community is portrayed in the media and in political and policy circles is a little bit of a separate question. And so when you see people that are, kind of lumped in, right? People assume that all Latinos are immigrants, or even worse, they're all Latinos are undocumented, or most of them, these kinds of things. And of course, the assumptions and the stereotypes that go along that get played out from certain voices, especially, along in that framework. I think that is, kind of explains some of it, right? I mean, it explains the fact that, immigration, if I'm already here, immigration policy is not necessarily impacting me in the same way. But in terms of, how we're portrayed and what that means for how we're treated, whether it's person-to-person level or at the workplace or by government policy, I think that, comes into effect in play in a different way.
Now, and actually pulling on that point, Victoria, I know you're from the ultimate mixed status family, those of us who have family members born outside the country or are born outside the country, and then some family members are born here, and that presents unique challenges for people. Can you tell us a little bit about, your experience with relating to the immigration system in this country and how it relates to your family's experience of relating to the immigration system?
Sure. Thank you, Rafael, for hosting this important conversation. So yes, I am the proud daughter of immigrants from Mexico, and I am the youngest of 9 siblings. Half of us were born in the U.S., and the upper half, as I like to say, were born in Mexico, as were my parents. And so for me, the experience was one of sort of secondhand experiencing the immigration system through my parents. But this was 20, 30 years ago, right, where my parents were were able to become naturalized. And it's important to note that we're currently working in an outdated immigration system where things just are not the same. Like we're there are 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country who are trying to navigate this system that by design doesn't work. There are currently 22 million people in this country living in mixed status families like mine who live under the constant threat of being separated from their loved ones, of being separated from their family members. So for me, it was one of just, helping my family navigate what it meant to be an immigrant in this country, whether it was, helping them translate and understand the systems under which we live, education systems, right, employment systems, or just, helping to navigate society and witnessing the unfair and cruel treatment that my own parents experienced in this country, which is really what's motivated me to do the work that we do at NIL today, which is to ensure that all of us, regardless of where we were born, how much money we have the ability to thrive in this country that we call home.
So we have this community that maybe isn't defined by immigration, but it's always been connected to the immigration. And for the last 50 years, we've been celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. So I'm going to throw out a dangerous question to all of you. What does this mean? Does this mean anything to you personally? Let's start with you, Monica.
Well, personally, I feel like it's an opportunity for us to make sure that across the country, people understand and recognize the contribution of our community, the many contributions that our community is making every day. I grew up in rural Ohio, daughter and granddaughter of migrant farm workers. It's not a place where there's a large Latinx community. And I remember when I first learned about Hispanic Heritage Month, I had a sense of belonging. I felt like I was finally understood and seen. And I hope that as we continue to celebrate this month of awareness, that we're making space so that other people can also feel seen, so they can feel that they belong, and so that we can hopefully change some hearts and minds along the way, but also remind people that celebrating the contributions of our community, honoring our community, it shouldn't just be 1 month a year. And I think that's what all of us are fighting for, to make things better for all of us every single day.
So Mario, does this Hispanic Heritage Month help celebrate celebrate our community?
Yes, of course. I mean, there's tremendous opportunity to talk about all the different contributions like that Monica alluded to, right? Whether it's cultural, economic, in other ways, Hispanics start small businesses at a rate 3 times that of the general population, right? That's a key economic empowerment issue right there. They're creating jobs often in their own communities, employing people. That's just one way, right? But everyone knows, Mexican food or Cuban food or whatever, right? I mean, those things, they can connect people. And so I don't mean to downplay it, but like there's everything from that all the way up to the economic and political contributions that our community makes to our great country, I think is very helpful. But again, like Monica said, it's a springboard. I think that we want to use it to have these conversations and to highlight these issues throughout the year. But it is good and important to have a period of time where it's recognized by policymakers and business and other people, thought leaders around the country.
So, Victoria, when we're using this springboard in advocacy, and in your case, in immigration advocacy, is it a useful moment when you're lobbying Congress, for instance, to go and talk to them and, oh, by the way, Congressman, this is the middle of Hispanic Heritage Month?
Absolutely. I think anytime we can focus on telling the stories of communities of color, of immigrant communities, and shed light on their humanity. Look, Latinos, immigrants are essential to this country, period, just because of our humanity. That being said, when we tell these narratives, we tell these stories about the contributions of Latinos in this country, the implications of that are far and wide. We highlight their contributions, their role in history, and these stories, these narratives are really how we make sense of the world around us. So it's really important that we continue to highlight and tell the stories. And it has implications on policy, it has implications on politics, it has implications on our culture. And it's really important to also remember that while many Latinos in this country are native born, a lot of Latinos, a significant percentage of Latinos in this country have immigrant roots. And unless you're a member of an indigenous community, or unless you were forcibly brought here under the travesty of slavery, you can probably trace your family back to another country. And so it's really important that we remember that shared humanity, that most of us have some background that is linked to immigration, and then look at the immigration policies and the systems that we have in place and the inhumanity. And think about the last 4 years of cruel and inhumane treatment that immigrants and Latinos have experienced under that administration. We expect better, we demand better, and that means policies that are humane. That means updating an outdated immigration system that really recognizes the vital role of immigrants, again, many who are Latinos in this country.
So on that point of our identity, there's an issue that's been a matter of controversy for some years now. What do we call ourselves? Are we Hispanic? Are we Latinos? Are we Latinx? Are we all Latinx, or is that just the liberals among us who are Latinx? Or are we Latin American? I really want sort of the panel to just jump in and, how do you define yourselves?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
I think it's generational. I think it's
Totally.
it's a lot of things, right? It's highly personal how we identify. I personally identify as Chicana because I grew up in a certain time, and there were political connotations to being a Chicana in this country, and that's how I identify. But again, I think it's highly personal, and I would love to hear how Monica and Mario feel about that one.
Yeah, it's so controversial. And I totally agree. It is personal. I identify as a rural Latina because for me, there's something very much important about naming the fact that I come from rural America, and my experience as a rural Latina is distinct. I choose to use Latinx or Latine when I'm speaking. Sometimes I use all of them because I also think it's important for us to acknowledge that we want to make sure that everyone in our community is being included, and that people understand that when we're fighting for the rights and the positioning of our community, it's for all of us. And so for me, the X and the E that people are now using with Latinx and Latine, that is a nod, and it's a way for us to embrace non-binary individuals in our community who didn't feel represented through the other terms that were being used.
So, Mario, I want to ask you specifically: can the term Latinx be used to describe a conservative Hispanic or Latino or Latina?
Well, I mean, I stick with Hispanic or Latino generally, right? And it just depends on the context and the specifics that that one is discussing or writing about, or what have you. I tend to, when I'm write op-eds or just have media appearances and things, I tend to use Hispanic and Latino sort of interchangeably. There are differences, of course, how technical you want to get. And that we, at HLF are not using Latinx as someone who knows a little bit about Spanish language. I mean, it is an Anglicization of the Spanish language. And, there are other things, of course, as well. We're not going to denigrate anyone who uses that. I mean, it's just not something that we're, kind of taking up here. But, we respect folks and how they want to be addressed and things like that. And so, that's sort of the broad general take that I have here.
I want to move a little bit into our history as a community in this country specifically. And like Monica, you've as you explained, you've been dedicating your life essentially to Latina farm workers. There's a lot of history there. And there's a lot of big names, and it might be a really easy answer, but who inspired you to really start on that path, that difficult path?
My family. I come from the farm worker community, and when I was very young, my parents made it a point to talk to us about being from the farm worker community. I'm the first generation in my family that did not migrate for the purposes of work. My parents started working in the fields when they were children. My father was 8 years old when he started picking cotton in Mississippi. And because of the way that they taught us to respect and value and appreciate our community, from a very, very early age, they inspired me to learn more. They were the ones who made it clear to me that I had an obligation to give back to the farm worker community and the community at large. And so definitely they were the first to inspire me and to motivate me to do the work that I'm doing. But certainly Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, so many greats who've led the farm worker movement and fought for rights for farm workers across the country. They've inspired me. And certainly the people that I've had the privilege to serve and to work alongside, they inspire me every day. The women who I've had the opportunity to represent through the cases that I've litigated on their behalf, they inspire me. So I have the privilege of being inspired all the time in my work, but certainly it was my family that first brought me to the realization that where my heart lies and what I was to dedicate my work to would be the community that I come from.
You mentioned Dolores Huerta. Have we had real progress since then? Do we really, when we stand on the shoulders of giants, and certainly with activists of that caliber, we can say that, but what are the sort of the landmark moments in that progress for you?
I mean, so many, first of all, I think that there are many organizers across the country like me who grew up looking up to Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, and they educated many, many of us to become the organizers that we are today, and that is important because we have inherited this rich tradition of advocacy and organizing that we continue to utilize in the fight for our community. But we know that in California, there have been many rights that have won not so long ago. In New York, they finally passed a farm worker state bill. And I think that probably the most recent thing that we would point to in terms of a landmark change is that when the pandemic hit and people realized that there was not enough food in the grocery stores and that people were questioning the security of our food supply chain, people started talking about farm workers, and people finally started to say that farm workers were essential. We knew that farm workers were essential long before. Farm workers knew that they were essential long before, but finally this country started to call farm workers essential. And I think that has given us momentum to push for some of the rights and protections that our community has been denied for over 80 years.
Now, Mario, I know you've come at this, you've been in this space from a very different angle. You worked a lot on Capitol Hill. You saw sort of the beginnings of the renovated anti-migrant movement We've talked about this extensively. We obviously don't have time to go deep into it. But what do you see right now as on the political side, sort of the challenges where the community has to band together and really push?
Sure. Well, I think that the main goal of the anti-immigrant movement, and led by a few extreme voices, I mean, it's always misinformation, disinformation, outright lies, propaganda, right? I mean, they want to paint our community as a lot of things that we're not, right? They'll take, if one immigrant jaywalked in some place, I mean, now it's like everyone's a criminal, right? Or heaven forbid, someone who did something that's legitimately bad and deserves punishment, but it'll apply to everyone. And this is why we can't let those people in, or what have you. I mean, these kinds of attitudes and things are real, and they're played out. It's not just an exaggeration for rhetorical effect. I mean, these extremist groups are all over Capitol Hill and on social media and pushing out extreme propaganda every day. And that has an effect. It has an effect on how normal people see our community. It has an effect on how policymakers see our community. And so that's a big part of the mantle that we take up here, is to make sure that propaganda is countered, that there are voices, and that there are people with actual data and real analysis being heard, and not the extremists.
So, Victoria, let's get a little bit deep into politics, just because I can't help it. So from the legal immigration advocacy side of things, what do you see right now? We're having a big discussion in Congress whether immigration should be included or can be included in the reconciliation package. The Democrats have been given 2 reversals. What avenues are left? How could, supposing they try, how could people voting for this reconciliation package protect immigrants in it?
So, yes, there's a lot happening on the Hill right now with the parliamentarian. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that Latino voters, immigrant voters, the broadest multi-generational diverse coalition of voters turned out in 2020 and voted for change. And if you look across the country at poll after poll of voters, not just Democratic voters, but Republican voters, independent voters, strongly support, even in red states like Montana, strongly support inclusion of a pathway to citizenship for the millions of immigrants in this country today. So we, urge and call on Senate Democrats, on the Biden administration, to keep doing everything that they possibly can to move this forward, because it's what the American voter wants. And I will say, it goes back to the previous conversation and some of the points that Mario flagged and Monica flagged. This is why the stories that we tell are so important. There are so many harmful and negative stereotypes and narratives that are out there, and it's really important that we share our own stories and our own narratives. And that's why one of the reasons that we launched our Immigrants Are Essential Narrative and Culture Change Project, because in the midst of COVID, in the midst of this pandemic, as Monica already referenced, but we saw day after day, from day one, immigrants, Latinos showing up in the midst of a pandemic to do these jobs, these essential jobs, often at great personal risk to themselves, often without the protections in the workplace that so many of us enjoy. And so it's really important that we continue to tell the stories, that we continue to remind Congress, that we continue to remind our fellow Americans that immigrants, Latinos in this country are essential to our recovery. Frankly, there is no recovery in this country without immigrants. And so those are the stories, those are the really important points that we need Congress, we need the Senate, we need Democrats, we need the Biden administration to hear and remember when they're going to these negotiations and having these political discussions that the American voting public expects change and expects a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million immigrants in this country.
So, Monica, what is a country where nothing happens on the immigration front? Once again, that's been the politics of the last 20 years, where Congress is unable to act or unwilling to act. What does that look like for the undocumented immigrant who's become an essential worker, who's working in a farm, who's getting food to our table?
Well, I think building on what Victoria was talking about, first of all, it's unconscionable that we're even in this place. We have thousands of farm workers, of meat packers, of poultry workers, of Latinx frontline workers who've gotten sick and who've died during this pandemic. It is unconscionable that we are in this place because many of them have been vulnerable because of their status. And so when you think about the way forward and what farm workers from our community and others are talking about, I think that one of the outcomes of this pandemic is that we really see all of our power and we understand that we have to continue to push. So I think that if Congress does not do what it needs to do right now, it is without question that our community will continue to rise up and push for change. And that might mean a change of political leadership. And I think that the political leaders need to understand that. They might look at our community and they might think that farm workers or other low-paid workers don't have power, but they're wrong. And we plan to use the power that we have. And that is something that we need to remind them of, because when they think about who they are accountable to, they are accountable to the farm worker who feeds and sustains them every single day, as well as other frontline Latinx workers who are doing what is required to keep our country running.
Mario, on the politics side, very quickly, last year we saw something really different for the first time. We saw that agricultural farm workers bill pass with substantial Republican support in the House. It never got to the Senate for whatever reasons. But what is the situation for those Republicans, some of them very conservative, whose districts are telling them, you have to liberalize this, whose farm owners are telling them that, and who clearly took a big risk and believe that immigration needs to change?
Right. Well, it goes back to what Victoria and Monica have both been talking about, and we've hit on a few times in this conversation. Right? Is that the stories? Right? I mean, the senators and the members of Congress in those states and districts, they sort of had no choice but to at least hear what people in their districts were saying, whether it's, from all the way from the farm workers themselves to maybe the business owners, the farm owners, or companies that have interest or in these industries and areas to say like, hey, this is affecting us, it's affecting the district, and it's affecting our states, affecting the country, right? And so when you look at those kinds of conversations and that take place, then I think that, people, I talked before, kind of reference, not using these words, but it's like kind of garbage in, garbage out when it comes to anti-immigrant propaganda, right? If you believe all these lies, then you're going to end up in a bad place. But what we see here is the power of the opposite, right? When, it's like, okay, here's someone who's real in your district, in your state, telling you these things, and all the data and all the evidence points that way, then it's like, okay, we have to recognize, we have to do something. And I think that's, hopefully where we can continue to end up, because it's just, there are extremes, I think, on both sides, frankly, that don't want to see a solution brought forth that's reasonable, and people who want to dig in and let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that's not healthy in the long run, on whether it's immigration or really any other issue.
So, Victoria, we're about to come to an end. I could go on with you guys forever, but we've got limitations. So I want to sort of bring it to right now. We're apparently possibly at the tail end of a very painful pandemic. Possibly at the tail end. What has our community learned? How's our community grown during the past almost 2 years?
I think this country has finally recognized the vital role of essential workers in this nation, and that a vast majority of essential workers in this country are immigrants, many Latinos. And so to Monica's earlier point, we have shown up, Latinos, immigrants have shown up and helped our country get through. We are on a path to recovery, but again, there is no recovery without immigrants. And so again, it makes this call for citizenship, for a pathway to citizenship, so much more important, because there's no recovery without immigrants. And so my hope is, and certainly what we're seeing again in the polling, is that the American voting public, Americans across the country, have come to this recognition and this acknowledgement that immigrants are essential to our country. Well,
thank you all so much. That brings us to the end of our program. I want to give a big thank you to Kia for its support and to all of you attendees. For those of you who missed any of the program this afternoon, we will have video from the event up on our website shortly. I'm Rafael Bernal. Have a great rest of your day.